Okay, guys, the next segment here is going to be our D-Star Roundtable. It's going to be general discussions with the chat room people out there regarding, the introduction you heard, and just, I guess, any other questions that we failed to answer earlier. I know a lot of people have been sending in questions, and we couldn't get to all of them, but this is going to kind of be a free-for-all right here. So go ahead and let's take some questions on the chat room.
Yeah.
I thought this was yours.
And I was...
Well, we just got a question from N2 RFA, which I think you're going to cover in your next session, won't you, Robin? About the call sign routing and the DVAP and the DV dongles?
Yep.
Where is it?
Here's a good question about what are people doing to get internet services at their tower sites. I think you'll find you'll find probably two varieties of connectivity that people are doing. One is DSL, but a lot of the tower sites are located at really out in the boonies. Some of the best ones are up on a mountaintop that high ground and not much up there, barely getting electricity. So some people are using some of the wireless links like Ubiquiti and some of those to provide internet access from some of the most remote locations down to someone who has DSL or a business that has internet access. So people are getting kind of enterprising on how they do it because it really makes the magic of D-Star if you can get a gateway that's connected to the internet.
So one other question. There was another good question. It scrolled off from KF4MIF on what it takes to set up a reflector. They wanted to set up a reflector in Mississippi, I believe. And
Bring it back towards you.
And the answer to that is you need probably the most scarce resource is a high-speed internet connection. Most of the reflectors live at data centers. So they have big pipes out to the internet. There's a couple of the reflectors that have gigabit Ethernet pipes going out, but the minimum is 10 megabits bidirectional. So that usually kills most residential DSL and cable, and you really don't want to run it on residential anyway, because at night when Netflix kicks up, then your bandwidth really goes down quite a bit. So that's really the key feature. Then you just need a server class system, 2 gigahertz plus dual core processor, runs Linux, 2 gigs of RAM, a few other smaller requirements. If you send an email to aa4rc at arl.net or amsat.org, I'll be happy to send you the requirements list for that. And more reflectors keep coming online quickly. Seems like when we get 2 repeaters in an area, they want a reflector to be able to bring all their people on. One of the benefits there, obviously, is that it has the bandwidth. Most of the gateways out there are on slower speed DSL or cable lines, so you can't really bring in a whole lot of dongles, DVAPs, hotspots, other links in. So the reflector gives you that capability. So that's why they're so popular right now.
Also, one of the things that I would recommend is that they reach out to the other D-Star repeaters in Mississippi and see what resources might be available for them. And I see on the bottom there they're talking about...
Get in here.
I got a mic.
It's not hearing you.
It's not hearing me? Okay.
Okay. Just kind of talk a little bit more here.
It's the third knob from the left.
It's up? Okay. Anyway, I see where you're saying that you wanted to check with MEMA. The best thing that I would recommend doing is get together with all the different clubs that have D-Star repeaters up in Mississippi and make a presentation to MEMA on how you'll be using it for emergency communications. And I know I did, and Chuck just came in there, N5VGK, had a nice meeting with him last week, and some ideas were shared there on integrating with some of the local TV weather stations and radars. So there might be a good case that could be made.
I'd also like to add that you don't have to have the repeater in your own state. There are many reflectors already out there. With the 58 that we've got, 3 modules at least on each one of them, there's 150 plus reflectors out there. Many of them are going unused. If you've got a use for a reflector, if you need one for your repeaters, if you drop a note to Robin or info@dstarinfo.com, we can probably find you a reflector that would be happy to host you out there for a little bit. So that's no problems. Also, one thing that we've thought about, the Southeastern WeatherNet, the reflector that it's using is 2 alpha. Now, if you look at 2 alpha isn't anywhere in the southeast. It's up in the northeast. Well, actually it kind of makes sense, because if we have a disaster in the southeast, why do we want a reflector in the same area we want a disaster? We kind of want the reflector somewhere else where we can trust it. We know that it's working at that point in time.
It's Nebraska.
I think that NE was Nebraska, not Northeast.
Okay, Nebraska, northeast. Okay, I can't read my own writing. But it's not in the southeast, so we don't. If the hurricane comes through, the weather hits a lot of areas in the southeast, we can expect that reflector still be on the air for us.
It is northeast from California.
Yeah.
Now, there was a question from W5EMA on the beep. Why can it not be at the beginning of the call sign? The beep is actually a flag that is sent from the repeater that is telling the radios that it is end of transmission. So it would be difficult to put that end of transmission flag at the beginning of the transmission or somewhere a little bit earlier. But you can use the CD function on the D-Star radios. The CD is the call sign directory, and you can see the last call signs that came in. As the later generations come out, and there's actually larger not repeater directories, but call sign directories under the CD function.
And the beep is also generated by the radio, not by the repeater. It's by the signal. And every once in a while you can have 2 beeps occur, because you actually hear the 2 end of signals occurring. You hear your own end of signal.
So the beep is not actually a courtesy tone as you think of with an FM repeater.
It's actually the indication that this is the last packet in the transmission, and it comes from the radio all the way through the stream, and then the repeater also adds another packet at the end. So that's why on some newer controllers you get 2 beeps instead of 1.
And that beep can be turned off by going into the set mode and turning all function beeps off.
And N3KDA asks a good question about reflectors, and can they be set up on co-location machines or virtual machines. And in fact, we have several that are either at colo sites or virtual machines on top of machines that are at colo sites. So as long as you have the requirements, the bandwidth requirements, throw a couple of cores at it, at least 2 gigahertz, have the 2 gigs of memory, then it should work just fine.
Captain Mick asked a question. I've got his call sign registered with a different designator for mobile, portable, dongle, DVAP. If someone tries to call sign route to me, how does that work? First, I'll say I've got like a half a dozen radios. All of them have the exact same call sign on them. I have no designators. But if we're done call sign routing, basically what will happen is the designator, if you're using call sign routing, it's going to only go to that radio that's using that designator. So it won't go to you. If you have all your radios with the same designator or no designator, which is the most common.
The designator being the 8th character of the my call field.
Good point. So if it's all the same, then no matter which radio you're on, it's going to hear you. So which repeater on. So I run without designators all the time.
This might be a good time to talk about the registration process and the use of those suffixes on there.
So Tom, can you switch us over to this computer?
Desktop 1.
Robin may want to comment on this, but he put together really the best registration instructions that I have seen, and it's available if you just go to dstargateway.org. It is the home page, and there is a step-by-step process with screenshots of the whole process that you go through.
And there's also a video on the ICOM America YouTube channel that takes you through this as well.
Uh-oh, I've got competition. Now I'm going to have to put a video up on it.
KI4GNT, we will get to your question on homebrew hybrids. Just be patient, please.
I think it's important to talk about the registration process. It's 3 steps, and all 3 must be completed before that you are fully registered on the D-Star network. Probably the first question is, do you even need to be registered? And I think the answer to the question is...
That's a good question.
But it's a
do
trick
you need
question.
to be registered
it's a trick question.
on the...
And Robin, why don't you answer that question?
Oh, you were taking it just fine.
Well, the bottom line there is, in one sense, no. To talk on your local repeater, you do not need to be registered. However, and if your repeater is linked, you're still going to go along with it wherever it's linked.
So that means if I get a brand new radio, I can get on there now. I don't have to be registered. I can get on and talk right
That was
now.
one of the very frustrating parts about getting a new radio, is having to wait to be registered to be able to get out on the internet. And that was one of the reasons. Yep.
Well, Ed's comment is a trick one as well. Courtesy-wise, you do need to program in your call sign in your radio. You can't just grab the radio and get on the air.
Right.
But you don't have to be registered. You do have to put your call sign in the radio.
But
you don't have to be registered.
If you want to execute some of the functions like being able to link your local repeater somewhere else, or to use one of the DV dongles or DV access points,
Or call sign routing.
Or call sign routing, you do have to be registered. So in that process, it's a 3-step process. First off, you should register on one and only one repeater.
But there was a comment from Frank here. None of my locals have a registration link.
If you cannot get on or registered with the repeater that is, say, closest to you, there are a few sources that will go ahead and register you. One of them, I think Robin always volunteers to do that as well. Are you still looking at W4DOC?
Well, we typically try to help find a system that will register you. If you can't, many of the vendors of the equipment that you purchase have their own gateways, and they will register you as well. If you're in an obscure country that doesn't even have a radio in it, then you really have to go out and find a host. Ideally, you register in your country, but there are some countries that just don't have D-Star yet. Yep. Ray, can you do something about that?
I only cover North and South America.
Cop out. So you'd have to go to another country, hopefully closest to you. If you really have problems, go to my email address that's on the dstargateway.org page, and I'll help you find a gateway to get registered on.
So the 3 steps that you go through is, first, go to one of these registration pages, and you'll enter some basic information, your call sign, your name, and your email address, and a password. At that point, it is up to the system administrator for that repeater gateway to approve your registration, verify that you are a licensed ham and legitimate, etc. Once that is approved, then there's a responsibility for you to go back in and set a terminal, as it's called. The simplest form of setting a terminal is to just put a space in there. Do we have that screen that we can get to? Let's see if we can do that. Okay, here's an example of that, and if you will look, and the listing of the 8 separate listings of your call sign there, if you look in that first column past the call sign called initial, you'll put a checkbox in that very left side and just put a space in initial, and then go over to where it says PC name and just put something in there, no spaces. I think it's all lowercase, isn't it? You can just put your name in there. It's kind of a unique identifier for you.
And in the initial, nothing is not a space. It needs to be a space.
You actually need to hit the space bar.
And one other thing to remember, when you get that local IP address, it's going to be a 10-base IP address. Write it down and save it. Because if you don't, and you expand onto the 1.2 gig where you're doing 128K data, that IP address becomes very critical to be able to have internet gateway access.
So at a minimum, you need to enter that space, and then you'll hit the update at the bottom. Now, some people will put in additional terminals, like an A for their DVAP or DV dongle, so that it kind of has a separate designation to know that you can't call sign route to a DV access point or a DV dongle. You do not have to do that, and here's where Robin and I will probably disagree a little bit, but people putting in a lot of different terminals on that has caused a lot of confusion. And I always see, and you've addressed so many of these on the DVAP dongle and DV dongle Yahoo groups, where they'll say, I'm registered, I put this in there, and I still can't get on, I can't transmit. And it's because they either did not put in that A or did put in the A, whatever. So for simplicity, I strongly recommend, and this is my personal opinion, just put the space in there. The only time that you technically have to have a second terminal registered is if you own two ID1s and you're going to be operating them at the same time, because as you note on that screen, it gives you it assigns a separate IP address for each one of those, and that's the IP address you should use with the computer that connected to your ID1 or in the router, which I'm using on the WAN side for that. So that's the time that you really need to do that.
Of course, John is 100% incorrect, but no, actually he makes a very good point. When you're a D-Star newbie, that is exactly what you do. The space entry needs to be there first and always there, and use that. As you become more experienced and you're exercising the gray matter that everyone has, you can go in and add other letters there and designate a letter for your dongle, a different letter for the DVAP, a different letter for a hotspot, so that people can keep track and, one, know that they can't call sign route back to you, but two, kind of shows them what type of device that you're on. And some people like to show off their new hotspot board that they just put together for Christmas and got the deviation just right and it's all working perfectly. So start out with the space, always have the space there. That initial field that he was just showing you is the field in the 8th character of the my call sign. So that's the mapping. Initial field in the registration to 8th character of my call, and that has to be there. So if you put a N in the 8th character in your radio, the N has to be there in an initial entry, one of those 10 entries on the registration page. The easiest thing to do, put a space entry in, put the space in the 8th character of my call, and you're set to go.
And one thing I think we left out here is, how long does it take after I do the first step before I can come back and do the next step?
Very good question. That's very frustrating. That's probably the most frustrating part of getting into D-Star is when you go in to do you request registration, and basically the gateway admin is verifying who you are, that you're a licensed ham, and he says, yes, this person is a licensed ham and I'm going to approve him on my system. Well, some gateway admins are better than others at checking their list, and some systems have more requests than others. So, I've known some admins that go in every week and check it out, and that can be very frustrating. So, ideally, if you can find the email address of the admin for the gateway that you're registering, sending them a little email over. There is a modification that can be made for those gateway admins out there that allows the system to send an email out to the admin when a registration request has gone in, and so they'll know that they need to go in and do it, but that's not the default. It takes a little bit of expertise to set that up, and that's why it's a little bit frustrating, because the admin has to approve your registration request first, and then you go in and add the terminal with the initial and the space in the initial field.
There are a couple of things to add on to this, and I saw the comment in the chat room about why are there so many different registration sites instead of one central. We've seen different ideas on how to handle this. In the United States, we wanted to be able to allow every repeater owner to have control. There are some clubs that put the repeater up that they have monthly dues. There are some that will put anybody in their area on. And then we've seen over in Europe where the first systems that went up in Germany had a central registration, and it was one person, and a lot of the hams there that didn't understand what was going on with the database, what were their privacy issues and that, they couldn't get them answered because of the, I see that, they didn't know what was going on with the database, so there was a lot of questions. Why was one country, one central registration site where other countries had freedom to go and do whatever they wanted to? So it's really how it's set up from the very beginning.
And Michael brings up VK5ZEA. Hey, Michael. Glad you're here. He brings up an excellent point, which is only register on one system. Once you're registered on one gateway, you're registered worldwide. So make sure you only register on one system. If you go into two different systems saying, well, this guy was slow, I'm going to go over and do this one, then you'd be registered on two systems, and that can actually cause some problems in the system when it's trying to find where you are, where you last keyed up. So make sure you only register on one gateway.
There is a site out there that one of the system administrators or very active DSTAR people has put together, and if you will go, if you'll bring up the screen for the query.
Yep. It's playing here.
Where's this? On
This machine.
computer. Okay. The site is query, QUERY.KI4SWY.org. And if you will put in your call sign, as Ed has put mine in there, it will come back, and first it'll give the ULS information for your call sign, and then you'll see the registered repeaters, and it will show which repeater that you are registered on. It shows I have a terminal count of 2, and then if you go further down, you'll see I've registered first, or the second entry in there is WB4QDX, and that's all, and that's my space, and then the second one I put in for WB4QDX in for my node adapter. Didn't have to do that, but I did. So those are my 2 terminals registered. But if you want to see if you are registered and your registration is valid and everything, you can go to this website. Again, that's query, QUERY.KI4SWY.org.
That sounds like an excellent feature for dstarinfo.com.
Do we know anybody from there?
You didn't see the look I just got from Ed. Say, oh, wait a minute, my site is Microsoft based, so do you know how long it's going to take me to do?
No.
I can give you a Linux template that'll make it really easy to pull that data in and
Okay, we can
provide
work on that. Okay, we can handle that.
Oh, by the way, for the folks in the chat room, we're watching the chat list here, and we see about 10 lines. So if we haven't answered your question, it may have just scrolled off. Feel free to keep asking the question again until we get to it, because once it's scrolled off, all of our memories are less than they once were.
I've got 2 questions stacked, but W5GGW just said, how might a person doing a lot of travel be able to control more than one system since they might have friends on other ends of their travel? I do travel a lot. I love the 31 because of the database. Once I get the GPS coordinates, it tells me what repeaters are close to me. There are several different ways that I can contact them. I can direct call sign route, so if I want to talk to John and I have no idea what system he is, where he is, I can program it in the your call field WB4QDX and key up and do a N9JA to WB4QDX, John, are you on radio? And it will automatically route the call to the last repeater that he keyed up on.
So here's a good one. When traveling to another country, do you need an operating license for that country? I'll first say, if you're using a radio. And the answer there is yes. So if you're using a radio in another country, you do need to be licensed to use that. So if you've got the DVAP or talk on local repeaters or anything like that, you will need a license to talk about. If you're using a DV dongle, do you want to answer that one?
What's that?
I don't know.
No, you answer.
He's going to talk about those in the next session.
We have a little presentation about that
the
later.
licensing of it. The DV dongle, since you're not actually transmitting RF in the country, as long as it's legal to do it over their internet, you should be safe, I would think, to do it, to talk on the DV dongle into the DSTAR network.
Well, let's get and I can't remember
and
the
there's
call sign. There's a
Tim, K6BIV.
Yeah, see Tim on there.
Lots of friends online this afternoon.
This is actually a fun one, and I mentioned earlier about experimentation, and that was homebrew and hotspots and everything else. I know there's going to be. I think there's going to be a section that. Are you covering that, Ed?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
That's John.
Or is that John?
One of us.
One of the twins. Okay. And they'll be
Was
covering
that Frick or Frack?
But
Ooh, I'm going to pay for that one.
There are different opinions on homebrew equipment and building your own stuff out there to play around with. At this point, ICOM's not looking at doing anything for a hotspot.
But there are plenty of third-party vendors out there that are supporting that.
Oh yeah, definitely a lot of third-party stuff. I've seen all kind of experimentation going on with that. The one thing that you need to be careful on as we get into the later generation radios, you've got to make sure that you're right on spec with what the D-Star spec is. And the D-Star spec is not only the common air interface, but it also covers the modulation and the amount of spectrum you use. So if you're putting it on an old FM transmitter, you're going to be splattering, and the 31, the 51, and the 7100 will ignore you because they're using a 7 kilohertz filter.
I see a lot of questions. If we can change gears a little bit.
And then one other thing, Michael is in here. Michael does a lot of experimentation on building his homebrew stuff. It's been fun watching some of the experiments he does. Michael, if you could pop up a link in the chat room so folks can get it and I can read it over the air, so those that won't have access to the chat.
And also, there's a question. Sorry it took so long to get to it. SV2LLJ asks about the inability to talk between the various systems, including the D+ network and the IRC DDB network. And right now, the D+ software is based on the US Trust Server system, so it uses the G2 database to authenticate the users that are in the system. I've talked to Jonathan a little bit about figuring out a way to cross-authenticate the two networks, but that's very much in the early stages.
This might be a good time to switch over. I've seen several questions on the chat about how do you reprogram the 31 and will be the case with the 51. Ed has built a lot of features into dstarinfo.com on being able to do downloads, so you can reprogram your radio or to do initial programming. So I'll let him take that, and he's going to be able to show you that.
So we're switching over here to this machine. Okay. So D-Star Info, we've got a lot of information out there. One of the ones that we put into the site was the ICOM software import files. Basically what happens here is you can go into this program, download the latest and greatest files, and load them into your ICOM software and put them into your radio. The files that you'll do for downloads from here are up to date as of when you get them. So if somebody comes in here, updates a repeater, and for repeater owners, you can update your repeaters at www.dstarinfo.com/update. You can come here and update it at any point in time. So for the downloads, kind of go over this screen. We give you the ability to specify the radio that you have. The reason why we do that is the different radios.
You've got the 51 and 7100 in there.
I try to stay ahead of the game. Is the different radios support different number of characters in their display. So when we're looking at the older radios, they might only have 6 characters in the display for the short name. But like the 31, the 51, 7100s have much longer number of characters in their display. So this specifies that so that you get the right radio that you want. Pull up 31 here. Actually, let's start up for a 92. So for 92, the important one that you want to download would actually probably be the memory list. The memory list gives you all the repeaters in a specific area. One of the problems, and I haven't really been able to build it into the software too awful well, is that when you import this into the ICOM radio, you import it into a bank, and the banks can only hold 100 repeaters. So you really want to do, like in the U.S., a state at a time, or in the rest of the world, kind of a country at a time. Gives a little bit of issues with Germany and Italy, which has a lot of repeaters out there, but if we just chose Alabama, we now do this. We can get the download. It's going to download it to a CSV file. Let's see what happens when we open it. Excel's going to open it up. You can edit this if you...
You should license that software.
Not my machine, okay? And this is all the information that plugs in. So you can take this, go into the ICOM software. If John can open up the ICOM software, he's got it on his machine. Open up the ICOM software, and then we can import that into the ICOM software. Then you can load in radios. This, by doing this, will have loaded every repeater in that area into your radios, and you can do this in 2 to 3 minutes.
But what if I don't want to use the ICOM software?
So this provides for the ICOM software. It also supports the
RT system.
RT system software. Sorry about that, folks. And you can import it into the RT system software also. So you can import in software and then write it to the radios. So John's getting his software not from the 92. Can you get the?
Oh, I thought that's one you wanted.
3151 up. Actually, no, the 92 is fine. You're fine there, or wherever you were at.
I'll be back to it.
So Ray brought up a point in my ear that ICOM doesn't support or supports importing the software for these radios. There's a couple radios missing off of that one. The 91 is one and the 2820 is one. So those two radios, you can't import it because the ICOM software doesn't support that. I wish they would.
So that would also be on the 2820, but there's still a resource for them to be able to do that, though, right?
The RT system software will
You can
allow
export,
to do it. Yes, you can do that with the
you
RT
can export
system
and then
software.
re-import into another radio.
So Tom, if you can switch over
He's
to
on.
you're already on it. Okay,
It's already on there.
So on this one, if you choose a bank up there on the top, John, or in the B bank, yeah, you're right, and do a file import. Yeah, you were right where you're at. You go file, import. So this is where you can actually specify the file. This is two different computers that we've got here, so John doesn't have the files already on his machine. This is where you would import the file that we just downloaded from the D-Star Info site. Import it there. All the information will get loaded in real quick and run. If you can switch back, Tom, or are you going to get it, John? Or
To who? You?
yeah, or Robin, switch it back here. Yes, sorry. So that's the basic memories, which works for all the radios. For the IC 3151, there is the repeater list. Repeater list won't work for the other radios, just for 3151. The repeater list is indeed the list of all the repeaters in a specific area.
Imagine that.
Wow.
Repeater list lists the repeaters.
Yes, isn't that an amazing
Wow.
concept? The 31 and the 51, I believe, both hold about 700 repeaters in the memories. The repeater list right now for the eastern and the western hemispheres is less than that, for 440 only. So if I go up here, switch down to 31, 440 only. Notice it turns off the VHF ones, because since the 31 is a UHF only radio, it will all fit in the radio at that point in time. If we go to the 51, it turns back on the VHF, and when I take an export of this file, it's a lot bigger than that. So we've got a little bit of problems that we're trying to work on it.
To make it bigger. Control plus. Zoom.
There you go. Kind of big. It doesn't want. I'm scrolling the radio a little weird on the computer. So this repeater list you can turn around and import into 3151 software. Then you can write it into the radio, and you've got a brand new list in there. The last one is the Your Call list. The Your Call list is not necessarily as important to get in a radio, but it's actually the one that has all the reflectors listed in it. So when you load the Your Call list into the radio, you get it. Now, I talked to you about all of this.
So I just wanted to make sure I understood that. The Your Call list includes reflectors.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a little interesting the way the DR mode that we use this. There are step-for-step instructions out here for doing this. So this carries you through each one of these, explains each one of them. And when you hear me talking about it or you think about it yourself, it sounds like a little hard, but after you do it once or twice, it becomes very, very easy just to download the file that you want, load it in software, write it to your radio. So it becomes just a few-minute process to update like a 31 or a 51 or any of your radios out there, except for the 2820 or the 91, which then we need to go RT Systems software. Now, as I said, this software downloads the latest and greatest database. The RT Systems software uses the same database, but they are usually a few months behind in updating their information. So when you use the RT Systems software, it'll be just a little bit not as up to date as you would be coming down from the site directly. So, any questions on the software loading process?
There's also a good comment by Brian, NJ6N. Hey, Brian, in Orange, California, also a member of the U.S. Trust Server team. He was telling admins to make sure you back up your system, and Brian did an awesome job of creating a little script that will automatically back up your gateway, the database, and email that to you. And I set that up on my system so that once a week our system gets backed up and emailed, because it's not that big, the SQL dump of the data that you need that's specific to your gateway. So make sure that you run that. And is that on the desync.dstarinfo?
Desync.
I think desync will work. Brian, if you're still out there, give us the link for where to go to figure out how to back up your gateway software, because that's really important. One of the side effects of the register on a local gateway is some of the data, the specific data, your password, your name, your email address, is kept only on that local gateway. The call sign information goes out everywhere, but the user-specific data is on the gateway, so that needs to get backed up.
It's a really hard link to get. dstar.info.
Which are we on?
I'll bring it up over here.
Okay.
So that's the link he sent.
Uh-oh.
Oh,
ooh, look at that awful picture on there. That was a sly way of self-promotion, right?
And if you look under Gateway Administrator Tools, you see the backup script and restoration, and it does work. I had to do that about 2 or 3 months ago, so it does work.
Let's go to Ken's site while we're here.
Yeah, and MM0DUN asked, maybe by FTP, you can have it saved to a local, like flash drive. You could, if you wrote the script, you could do an FTP. You could do a push via web. The easiest for me was it's already got email knowledge in it, so I just told it to email once a week to me, and that's really key because your hard drive's going to die, and most of the gateways are not in the friendliest sites. They're on the top of mountains and under towers, and they get lightning hits, so it's really important to back up that information on the gateway. Probably correlated to that is if you take your gateway off the air or you want to change the call sign, you need to coordinate that with the Trust Server team, because some of that data is out in the network synced with the G2 software. So they need to not only remove your system, but any lingering data from your system. That's one of the questions that I get often is we want to change the call sign on our repeater. It's not an easy thing to do.
So here's a question I'm going to give to John. SV1 EDC, EDZ, an important emergency issue is the connectivity between repeater sites. We can't depend on the internet network to be sure that we'll have a network active during an emergency situation. What do you say to that, John?
Well, that's a very true statement, that if the internet goes down at your local site, you have lost connectivity to other repeaters. However, you still have your local coverage. It's true that the protocol and the architecture the way it is right now, you have no way to directly connect repeaters. I think there is actually the 10 gigahertz units.
There's a 10 gig, but let's take a step back. There's a lot of systems that I know of that are on the global network through the internet. But in an emergency, they switch over to their own private IP network, whether it's a microwave links. I think you guys are doing that down in Georgia, where you have some microwave link backups.
We want to
There's
implement
fiber backups, Ubiquiti, or is that
Ubiquiti.
Ubiquiti? Sorry, Ubiquiti makes some real nice Wi-Fi products that will make a backup. So there are consumer grade products that are out there, as well as commercial grade products that are used in the commercial two-way business and in the IT business, that are a lot less expensive than what an amateur radio manufacturer can develop for such a small niche market.
Also, Brian, NJ6N brings up a good point. He's always wanting to give other people the credit for the awesome things that he does. Darren, G7LWT, who I believe is also a newly appointed Trust Server member, is the one that came up with the idea for the email. And that's such an awesome idea. Before, admins really were on their own to run a backup script, and that really was one of the great things that came out of the Trust Server team, augmenting the ICOM G2 software, because the backups are just so critical to these systems that are in areas that are going to get hit.
And so to carry on from Ray and John, in Georgia, we've had the opportunity to go into a number of repeaters that are at fairly well-hardened sites with fairly good coverage, and one of our issues that we have is hurricanes, and so they come in, they do lots of damage. But generally, the concept is that if you have the repeater outside an area, because natural disasters are generally only located within a relatively small area, a coastline. They don't go in 50 miles from coastline. They're only like 15 to 20 miles inside the coastline. So if you got repeaters outside that area, they can cover into that. They'll have internet access during the disaster. So the point is, John quite often says, it's another tool in the toolbox. If we're lucky, we have a repeater that now has access to the rest of the world. If we lose the internet, we still have a repeater that can work local. We have a repeater that can work local that can also work local data. So we have a number of capabilities off that same repeater, even though it's lost internet access. But if life is with us, we can now get connectivity to the rest of the world. So I kind of look at it, at the minimum, it's a little bit better than an FM repeater, and at the best, it's a whole lot better.
And it also depends on how you deploy it in an emergency as well, because there are a lot of simplex usage where you could go to an internet connection that might not be tied to the repeater. So it really depends on how you want to deploy the system for an emergency.
And I have a slight advantage. I have a repeater here in the back behind us that if there's an emergency, I go as far as I can get internet access. I set the repeater down. I raise the antennas up. Now I've got coverage further distance in.
So there was a question from Jim. Hello, Jim, M5MIJ. I didn't get the question. It scrolled off the screen just as I saw that you asked it. So
he's not allowed questions.
Put that in again.
He should have that.
Oh, we can just talk about him.
Yes, we could do that.
Yeah.
And the reason why we pick on Jim and his group actually installed the very first D-Star system that was not at ICOM America, ICOM Canada, ICOM UK, or in ICOM's possession in Japan. It was the first civilian-owned D-Star repeater. So he's been on board from the very beginning with us.
So I heard the word earlier, but I don't think we really explained who, what, where. Trust server team. What's a trust server, and what's a trust server team?
Yeah, so for all of these systems to talk to each other, they have to know where they are, how to get to them, what the IP address of each system is, what IP address that you're trying to do call sign routing to or make a link to. And all that is facilitated by the ICOM G2 software, which has the database of wherever system is, and every 5 minutes it's constantly syncing with the network to make sure that it's up to date. Well, there's a great team that started in Texas, the Trust Server team, and they put up the first master system that keeps track of everything and that all other systems connect with to do their syncing. And as I say, it's about every 5 minutes. It syncs up, and that not only is when you have a dynamic IP for a gateway, but when you hop around repeaters, where you currently are to do call sign routing to an individual is facilitated by that. And we've got some folks, I won't mention names, Mark, KJ4VO in Atlanta, that will hop on 4 different repeaters in a 1 minute period, because he drives from north of Atlanta down through the mountains into Atlanta and hits, as I say, 4 different repeaters on his way to work at HRO. And so the system is constantly having to try to figure out where he is because he's so popular and people call sign route into him, especially from Japan. He gets a lot of people from Japan coming in. So that's the major function of the U.S. Trust Server, is to coordinate all those systems. And there are other servers out there. The IRC-DDB gateway system has their own equivalent of that, and we were talking a little bit earlier about how to make those two systems talk to each other. There was also, on that line, KF5MIF was asking about dongles and DVAPs and hotspots talking to the DCS or XRF networks. Now those are based on non-US Trust Server systems, so the software that I write right now is specific to the U.S. Trust Server network, but there is software out there that you can search for that will talk to all of the different networks, from dongles, DVAPs, hotspots, all the different devices, including other gateways. Let's see, there was another question that keeps scrolling on. Sorry, KI4GNT. I've seen your question, but we're hams. We like to talk here, and we've talked almost 53 minutes into this now. He asks, is there going to be a dual band DVAP? We've looked at that. We just came out with the 70 centimeter. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. In fact, in 7 minutes. But we're trying to figure out, we've got several things in the hopper. Do you make a dual band DVAP? Do you make a combination DVAP and dongle to carry on the road with you? Do you make one that has network connectivity or that can plug into some of the cool devices that are out there? So
build them all.
We're playing with all of those options, and we're just seeing which one vies for the top spot as the next new product.
So Tom here has put out a request to send pictures in. What address should they send pictures, Tom?
WA5KUB@gmail.
WA5KUB@gmail.com. Send your pictures in front of big screen TVs with all your equipments, with all your toys, all your D-Star toys. Send them in, and so we can see that. So we want to take a break here right quick and reset.
Well, MM0DUN just had a good point that the backup script that Brian wrote for gateways does deposit the file in the temp directory, so you could go and pick that up via FTP, and he utilizes that functionality. Thanks for that. And
then there's a question from Angelo. Unfortunately, we will not release the source code on the 91, but there is a software package called Chirp, and he's also the same guy that wrote the DRAT software. It's a free download. You can import and export in any of the ICOM radios, including the 91, and the RT system. The Chirp, there's no charge for. RT Systems does a lot of nice things that you can copy and paste from one radio to another. So you just buy the different modules for the different radios you have. So there's other software solutions.
It's pretty sweet. RT Systems code is pretty sweet.
Yeah, it is. And there's other software solutions out there besides the one that we have created at ICOM.
2W0CDY. Hold that thought for the next session. We'll talk about that a little bit. Maybe some Android things coming.
So should we break then?
If you'd like.
Let's do it.
Let's go for it.
Okay, we're going to take a quick breather for, we have 5 minutes, and then we'll go into the next section, which is D-Star 201, which is dongles, DVAPs, reflectors, oh my.